Imagine you got a new job as a .NET web developer and the first code you have to touch is all about databases. Chances are you have to use Dapper. Sound familiar? In this tutorial, we will build a full web app with the .NET Web API, Dapper and SQL Server Express. And additionally to all CRUD operations, we will also implement all three types of relationships to really level up your skills. And the best part, you can get the complete source code of this tutorial for free. Just check out the link in the video description below. But first, watch and learn, and then get the source code. Let's dive in. All right, now before we start with the actual implementations of Dapper or the CRUD operations, let's first have a look at the current situation we have here. We will work with two databases, the video game database simple and the video game database normalized. Please ignore the blazing block database here. This is from the .NET Web Academy. Maybe you want to check this one out. Link in the video description. Thank you very much. But first, let's focus on these databases here, and we will practice or learn the first CRUD operations with the simple video game database. Well, in this example, we only have one table, as you can see here, the video games table with the following columns: ID, title, publisher, developer, and a release date. And when we check out the data, of course, we already have data here. We've got 10 games with the ID, title, the publisher, the developer, and the release date. And I can already hear all the mean comments below. Hey, this thing is not normalized. That's true. And this is by design because, again, relationships is done with the normalized video game database. And I am sure you find other errors or mistakes there. Then please write them down in the comments and I'll try my best to fix them. But for now, let's just focus on this stuff. And if you already want to know what's the normalization here, what are the normal forms, let's just assume you're new to your job maybe, and you want to learn this stuff, you have to learn this stuff. Well, let's just say in this specific case, you see, for instance, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is published by Nintendo. Same thing for Animal Crossing. And this here, in essence, violates the third normal form. So when you build relational databases, there are a couple of normalization or normal forms. First one, first, second, third, and the boycott, and I think something else after that as well. But anyways, this is not a deep dive about that. Of course, if you want to write it down in the comments, and I will just create a theory lecture. Maybe this is interesting for you, and I will show you examples of all these normal forms. But in this specific case, you see Nintendo is mentioned twice, and that's in essence a duplication of data, right? And to avoid that, you would normalize this thing. And let's just have a quick glimpse maybe at this database here. Here you see then we have a couple of tables actually. We also have our video games, but as you can see here, instead of the publisher, the name of the publisher, the title of the publisher, we only have the key, right? The ID of that publisher. And when you now open the publishers table, you see that we actually only have 8 entries here, right? Instead of the 10 of the video games. So Nintendo used twice. As you can see here, Legend of Zelda, publisher ID is 1. Same thing for Animal Crossing. So this is the whole magic of the third normal form. And we will cover that later because this is, well, it is different, of course, because we have to take all the relationships into account, one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many relationships. But again, let's forget that for now. We have the simple video game database here first. I think the data is clear then, that we only have this thing here, ID, title, publisher, developer, and the release date. This is what we want to read, right? We want to get data, a single entry maybe all the entries. And then we also want to add an entry, add a game, update a game, and delete a game from the database. So let's start with Visual Studio. And there we will create a web API first, a web API project. And of course, we have to do some boilerplate stuff. But again, if you are in a situation where you're new to all that, I think it makes sense to keep watching here. So ASP.NET Core Web API. For this example, of course, you can use any kind of application to use it with Dapper. So let's call this Dapper Beginners Course. And we put this here, .NET 8 for now. configure for HTTPS. Great, we don't need authentication. This example, OpenAPI is great, so we got Swagger UI to test all that, and we use controllers. No minimal API, please. I want to use my good old controllers. All right, there's our project, and the very first thing that we have to do, if it's not already done, is we have to add the Dapper NuGet package. So we go to Browse, look for Dapper, and here it is. Dapper, a high-performance micro ORM supporting SQL Server, MySQL, and so on. And there's already a very interesting term here, right? Micro ORM. Let's install this. Stands for Object Relational Mapper. And maybe the question arises, what the heck is this? In the end, this thing just helps you mapping your tables to your objects in C#. And with Dapper, you have to build your models by yourself. I first have to check, it's here. Okay, nice. So this means that we, for instance, create a models folder, entities folder, whatever it is, and then add our video game class there. When you're comparing that to Entity Framework, it's pretty much the other way around, right? When you start with code first migration, in this case, you build your models first, and after that, then you would start a migration and the database would be built with the help of Entity Framework. Of course, there's also the database first approach with Entity Framework. This is similar to this situation here, where you have the database first with the tables and so on, but you can then scaffold the models. You can use Entity Framework to read the database and then create the models, and then maybe turn this then into a code first migration, into a code first approach, where you then use your models, change the models, and then run migrations, and with that then change the database. So you don't have to touch the database then after that. But in this specific case, when you're using Dapper, you always have the situation that you have to make changes to the database manually most of the time. And then in your code, you also have to change your models, maybe adapt your functions, your repositories, whatever it is, right? With Entity Framework, well, that's the good side, well, where you can do it automatically and it works, but sometimes maybe it doesn't work. So this really, well, in the end, the decision and the choice is yours. But again, maybe if you're in the situation that you have a project and you just have to work with Dapper, this might be the situation. You have your database and first, and you have to change stuff in the database manually, or you have a database team that changes stuff, and you then as the developer have to change your code and adapt. All right, now let's create our model. So here we just add a new folder and we call this thing models. And in here, I want to add a new item, and this is now the video game. And in this case, again, we have to manually add all the properties. So when we check out the database again, we see we have the ID, the title, the publisher, developer, and the date. The ID is an integer. Title to developer is a string, and the release date then is a date time. So here now we hit prop, tap twice. This is an ID, and then here we have our string, and this is the title. Now what we can do to remove this warning here, see that it's a non-nullable title, must contain a non-null value, so we can set this to required, for instance. And same thing pretty much for all the others, or we could initialize this with, if you write this correctly, we can also initialize this by an empty string, stuff like that. So this is now the publisher. Then we've got the developer. All right, next thing, required string is the platform, actually. Platform, and the last one is, yeah, let's also set the date here. Date time is the release date. Great. All right, so this is our model. And now to be able to actually work with this model in the database, we have to create a connection, right? And for that connection, we need a connection string. Maybe you find this in the app settings JSON file. So here, what we can do is we can open another section called connection strings. And in here, typically, you have your default connection. Again, very similar to Entity Framework. I know I talk a lot about Entity Framework. I just use Entity Framework a lot and I love it. Oh no, now I get the dislikes. But I think lots of you guys have to work with Dapper as well. And for that case, I want to create this a little tutorial, this little course here. So first, the connection string. For SQL Server Express, in particular, if you're working locally, it's the following. Localhost, SQL Express, then the database name. This thing is the video game DB simple. Then we've got trusted connection set to true, and then trust server certificate also true. That's it. So again, server, localhost, SQL Express, database, video game DB simple, trusted underscore connection is true, and trust server certificate also true. And this is, by the way, doesn't really matter if you're using Dapper or Entity Framework or any other kind of ORM. This is specific to SQL Server in the end, all right? If you're using another kind of database management system, then you need another connection string. All right, so we've got our model ready. We've got the NuGet package. We've got our connection string. And the next part is really using already Dapper and our model to get some data. Now for that, of course, we could do it the easy way and just use a controller and build a so-called fat controller, meaning that all the logic is in that controller. I think this would be sufficient for this tutorial, but maybe we can do it a tiny bit better and create, let's call it a repository. You can also call it a service. It's just, in the end, it is a service that you're using to then inject into your controller with the help of dependency injection. So many buzzwords, I know. But then it's just more organized, and you can use your repository or your service in other controllers as well if you need it. All right, so let's do it that way. So let's create another folder for that. New folder, repositories, like that. And here now I first add an interface. So here, this is our iVideo game repository, like that. And here now we can define one method. For instance, task, because we want to use an asynchronous method here, and this thing gets or returns a list of the video game. You see, automatically we've got the using directive here, and we call this thing get all async. All right, so this is for just reading all the video games. Now I create another class here, and this is our video game repository. And this thing now implements the iVideo game repository. We get an error here saying, hey, you forgot to implement the method here. See that, the get all async method. You really should do that. Now show potential fixes with control and period, and then implement the interface. And here's our method. Isn't that great? We see now get all async, but it is not really implemented. So we have to add some stuff. Now the next step is to actually be able to work with our database. We need again the connection, and we can read the connection string from our app settings JSON file. For that, we need the following. We add another variable here, a field in essence, private read only, configuration. Configuration is the correct name. Have a little warning here, and with control and period, we can see generate constructor video game repository. This is exactly what we want. We could also use the new primary constructors. Honestly, I am not sure about that for now. If I really want to use them, I liked it like it was before. So maybe let's just keep it like that. We have our private read-only configuration, and now we can inject this thing, and with that we are able to read everything from the app settings JSON file, in particular the connection string. So here now let's add another method to get this connection string. So for instance, down here, private SQL connection, because this is what we need here. And let's just call this get connection. We could also use a property for that. There are different ways to do this, obviously. And here now, we just return configuration, get connection string. All right, you can see it here. It's just shorthand for get section connection strings with a name. And here the name is the, let me put this into a new line. The name is the default connection. And this is not really what we want to return. What we want to return is an actual new SQL connection. So new SQL connection with this string here. And for that, we need something. And this is the package System Data SQL Client. Not the Microsoft Data SQL Client, it's System Data SQL Client. So let's install this package, the latest one. And with that, you get the SQL connection that you need. Hope it's installed now. And now we can also use it. And with that, we get our SQL connection. All right, and with that now comes the actual implementation. Bear with me here. There are a couple of ways to do this. I think you will find similarities in the code that you currently already have. Maybe if you have a project or you just start from scratch, then you can do it like that. There is not the best way, in my opinion. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, please. But you can, for instance, we are now use the using keyword, and then you can use curly braces for the scope. This is not necessary anymore. You can still do this. There are other cases where you have to, or where you want to open the connection first before you run your query. Also not really necessary if you don't want to. So you might see different snippets in the project that you are currently working on. And I suggest that you keep using these, maybe if you think they are good. Otherwise, maybe ask or suggest to change them. But either way, if you stick to one way of coding your operations, of implementing your operations, stick to this way. I think this is better for the team and for your future self. So one example would be to say we have our connection, which is now get connection. All right. And now we just want to get all the video games. Now for Dapper, this means we have our video games with a wait, or we get them with a wait, and then connection, query, async, and we have to tell Dapper what we actually expect. In our case, this is now the video game model, the video game class. All right. Video game. All right. And now we have to manually write our SQL statement. So select everything from video games. All right, so let's double check. When we have a look at our database, there's a database, video game to be simple, and the table is called video games. All right, so that's that. And in the end, we return the video games and turn it into a list, because here we get actually an IEnumerable, and I like to use lists. So we turn this thing into a list and we are done. So here again, the complete thing, the very first thing, and really based on that, you can work with that and build up on that, right? So you get query async, you get execute async for non-queries. Let's say, so for instance, if you update something, delete something, there are also other methods to do that. But here, this is really the base. And if you want to get a single row, then you will see that in a minute as well. But this is actually the first thing, the most important thing, I think, and this is why it also takes more time than the others, that you have to learn. You need the connection string, the NuGet package, and so on. Everything has to be in place, work together, and then you start with the connection, use it to query something with a manual SQL statement. I know I said I don't want to talk about NET Framework anymore, but this is not necessary with NET Framework. You can use it if you want, raw SQL queries, but you don't have to. In Dapper, you have to, you definitely have to. But, well, this also means that you have full control over the stuff that you're doing with the database. And then Dapper is doing its magic and maps the result of this, or tries to map the result of this SQL query to the actual thing, to the actual class that you want, all right? And then you just return it. Now, regarding the controllers, This is now web API stuff. We add a new controller, a new web API controller, not MVC, API, an empty one. Best way to learn, in my opinion. And we call this thing simply a video games controller. All right. In here now, we need our new repository. So private read-only I video game repository. This is now the video game repository, like that. Again, we create a new constructor, like that. And now with that thing, we can create our first get method in the end. So let's add the attribute HTTP get, and then public async task action results. And again, we expect a list of video games, like that actually. And again, we call this get all async maybe. And now the only thing that we do here is we return, or first let's just say what are our video games. This is await video game repository get all async, and then we return OK video games. All right, so this is the whole controller magic. There's one more step left, and this is in the program CS. We have to register our repository, and I just see here that there is a typo. Why didn't you tell me, guys? So here, this is the I repository, like that. Okay, now I hope everything's correct. And here now, builder services, not add controllers, add scoped, and this is now the I video game repository, and the implementation for that is video game repository. All right. This is now really dependency injection stuff. This means that we say as soon as something, in this case the controller, wants to inject the video game, the I video game repository. This is important, the interface, right? So this thing here, you want to use this thing, the I video game repository. Then here we say for the actual implementation class, use the video game repository class, right? Could be the case that, for instance, we split this into a video game simple repository and a normalized repository, right? We could do that. And in this case, you just change this line, and then the controller knows I want this iVideo repository, but actually what I want to use is the video game repository or the other video game repository. You just have to make sure that if you go this route and say I have the video game simple repository and the video game normalized repository, that both implement the I video game repository interface. So with that, we have this contract, right, to make sure that all the methods of the I video game repository are implemented. Okay, this is just a side note. So everything is done, I guess. Took a long time already. And now let's see, where is our result? There it is on my other screen. So here we have the Dapper beginner course. This is Swagger. Make sure if you don't see this page to use the proper port. You find this port, by the way. Let me check that. Here in the properties folder, launch settings, and then you can see there, HTTPS, the application URL for Swagger or for the project is localhost 7105, right? HTTPS. You see the same, and then Swagger, and then index.html. And as you can see here, we have our example weather forecast controller, but also the video games controller with already the method, the one get method here. This is an example value. That's nice, but we can try it out, execute this thing, and we get all our games. Isn't that nice? So this already worked. We got the games. Everything is map expect the, apart from the platform actually. Yeah, this is something I missed. Wait a sec. Yeah, I think that was one thing I went, or one thing too far actually. This is for the normalized part. So let's just reload this thing and try this out again. And now everything is correct. We don't see the platform, but we see everything else. The ID, the title, publisher, developer, release date, is here. This, I think, looks pretty nice. All right, so now let's just continue with all the other CRUD operations so that we get to the real meat then with the relationships. And by the way, here I just wanted to show you that you can also see with the Swagger the video game here as well. All right, next thing, let's implement the other methods here. So first, let's just receive a single video game. So task video game is what we expect, and we want to receive this thing by ID. So get by ID, async int ID. Now for the other ones, for instance here, you could receive the complete list of video games. It's not typically the way you would do this with adding a video game, so let's scratch that. We can of course get all the video games after adding one. So we don't get anything back when we want to add a video game. So let's just call this add async, and for that we need a complete video game object. Pretty much the same thing for update, but for delete, IntelliCode knows exactly what I want to do. We need the ID. So when this is done, we can go to the implementation again and implement the interface automatically. We've got now the add up here, delete, and get by ID and update async. All right, now first let's start with the get by ID async, shall we? Now here I want to show you another way of implementing this, right? So here you already saw this way, but now let's say we have using again, and now var connection get connection, and now we're using the curly braces. All right, and in here now we first open the connection. So connection open. And what does it say here? Opens a database connection with the property setting specified by the SQL connection string. All right. But then the actual method to get the video game is quite similar. So here we can say var video game and then await connection and then query, but this time it's only one object. So what we can use here, you see it here already, first async, or see it here, execute a single row query asynchronously using a task. And here it says executes a single row query returning the data typed as T. So let's use query first or default. We want a video game, and the query for that is select all from video games where the ID, and this is now important, we're using parameters here. We don't now say something, or we don't use string interpolation and then just enter the ID here, because this then could lead to SQL injection, meaning destroying your database in the end. Maybe if an attacker tries to do something like that, then he or she might be successful if you don't use parameters here. So add ID in this case, or like that. And now for this object that we want to enter, let me scroll a bit further down. We just say new, and then the ID is the ID from our parameter with a lowercase I, actually, like that, this thing here. All right, so select from video games where ID is ID, and this thing here, these have to match. This is now our ID that we entered on top. And what's the issue here? I forgot to use the async one. All right, so now we've got await connection, query first or default async, video game, select everything from video games where the ID is the given ID. Again, don't use string interpolation here. We want to use parameters here with Dapper to get the data. This is very, very, very important to avoid SQL injection, so to reduce any potential attacks. All right, and in the end, we return our video game. And this thing could be null, but let me just leave it at that for this tutorial. So now back to the controller. And here we have another get method. So HTTP get again, but this time we can add an ID. So let's say this, so for the routes, we just use the actual parameter, right? So this thing, by the way, is the same as writing HTTP GET and then route, and then here you would enter the ID. All right, so these two attributes can be combined like that. This is just another syntactic sugar, if you like. So now for the method, public async task, again, an action result with just one video game is expected here. Get by ID async, we have our ID here, like that. Okay, I hope this is now correct. And our video game now is await video game repository, get by ID async, and this is the ID, and then we return okay video game. What we could also do, of course, is if video game is null, then we can return not found and say this video game does not exist in the database. Sad smiley. All right, let's try that. We restart our application. There we are. And now let's try this out. We enter ID 1, hit execute, and we get the Legend of Zelda 2, Red Dead Redemption 3. All right, then what about 10? We got Among Us. What about 11? We got this video game does not exist in the database. Nice. All right, so this works. And now we move on to adding, updating, and deleting a video game. By the way, one more thing I wanted to mention is really, if you look at these two methods now, right, and the actual code, you see the using statement here with the curly braces, so the complete scope. Well, in the end, this is just there to make sure that the dispose is called in the end, but this also works in that way, all right? So the dispose method is also called when the connection is closed. And here, explicitly opening the connection is, as far as I know, with Dapper not really necessary. Dapper can do this automatically. Dapper is great, really, by the way. I know I talk a lot about Entity Framework, but Dapper is also really, really nice. So you don't have to use it like that. You can, of course, for maybe readability issues sometimes, maybe it is necessary to do it that way, but you don't have to. If you don't, or if you want to reduce the boilerplate code that you have to write with Dapper, you can totally do it like that, meaning using var connection, get connection, whole boilerplate stuff you actually need. Then you can do your queries, return everything. Dispose is called. The connection was already opened with the using var connection statement actually, and you're done. All right, so if you're like me, maybe you want to use this code here, you prefer these lines. Otherwise, you can also use this, totally valid as well. And as I mentioned already, do it as your team is doing it, right? When you already see some code and they always do it that way, then maybe you just stick to it and do it as well. But of course, you can still ask if maybe you can use this approach or change or refactor the other code, and this would be also great. All right, if you have anything else to say about that, please tell me that in the comments. I'm pretty sure you know more than me, so let's just move on with the other methods. So here in the interface, we've got now add async left, update, and delete. So in the implementation, now we go to the add async methods. Again, we can just use this thing here. All right, to open a new connection, we need the async keyword here. And then we say await connection. So we don't get anything back, or we do actually, but we don't want to use it. So now here, what we can say is execute async actually. But let's have a look what else we got, so that you really see what Dapper is providing. So we have the open async, close, dispose, right? Begin transaction. This is also interesting. If you want to do more than just one query, then we have, what else do we have? Execute. This is what I just said. So we can just use execute async, executes a command asynchronously, execute reader, parameterized SQL, return a data reader, execute scalar, selects a single value of one column maybe. And what else? query. This is what we already used, right? We used the query async to get any data actually, right? So the complete table, for instance, or we want to just have a part of the table of the data, then we can use query async. First, single row, first to default, similar, let's say. You have the multiple async, multiple result sets. That's also something that we could have used. Then the single, similar to the first or default, right? So single will give you the single value that you expect. First is the first value in your query, so there is the big difference. If you would have more results, then you get the first one back. And then unbuffered, don't know if this is interesting for now, but that's pretty much it. So now, for why am I doing this? I just wanted to show you these are the options that you have, but for the other ones, for the other CRUD operations now, add, update, and delete, what we actually use is always execute async. All right. So here now we add our SQL statement. By the way, what do we get back here? It returns an integer, and this integer, you see it here, returns the number of rows affected. So you could use that to check if something actually happens. If you add something and you should get, or add one video game, then you should get one back. And then of course you could work with that and check, okay, did this actually, was this successful? If I get one back, then well, it was, I think. Otherwise, something happened there. Maybe I have to check this. Maybe I have to, or should return an error message, something like that. Well, then I could work with that. Similar to updating and deleting. Depending on your SQL statement, maybe you get, or you expect one back, the value one, because you only wanted to update one specific video game, but maybe you wanted to change the, I don't know, publisher of several video games, then you get more of than just one back. And same for delete. Do you want to delete one video game or a couple of video games? All right, now what we want here now is just adding one video game, and this works with insert into video games. Actually, I wrote video games with all caps, right? In the other, don't have to do that. Doesn't really matter with the SQL Server, which is nice. But yeah, let's just change that anyways, so it's correct. Insert into video games, and we actually got title, publisher, developer, and release date, not the platform. And now for the values, we again use parameters here. Title, publisher, developer, and the release date. And since now the properties are called exactly the same, we can just add our video game here that we provide. All right. So again, we have insert into video games, the title, publisher, developer, and the release date. Let me just double check. Title, publisher, developer, release date, correct. And again, use the parameters, which are called exactly the same as the properties here of our video game. All right, so that's that. And that's it. So now in the video games controller, we add our post method for the first time. So HTTP post, it is public async task with only the action results. All right, add async video game, and here we just call await video game repository, add async video game, and we return okay. Let's try that real quick with an interesting video game suggestion, of course. So here now, try this out. This is our suggestion. We actually don't need the ID. This is done automatically. And we hit execute, and we get a 200 back. So now let's check this out with get all the video games. We hit execute. And is it here? Yeah, this is ID 11, title string, publisher string, and the developer is also string. And this is the date, the August 29th. All right, this worked. And of course, we can also get the single one. Try this out here with 11, hit execute, and there it is. Perfect. So now updating. Back to the repository, and here is our update methods. Again, we need the connection like this, add async, and again we call connection execute async await actually, and this time it is update video games set title publisher is the parameter publisher, developer is developer, and release date is the release date. And again we can just set the video game here like that, and again that is it for this method. Hey friends, while editing this video I just saw that I did a big mistake here in the update. So currently when you run this, and we did, then all the entries will be updated. Of course I forgot the where statement, so here you would have to set where ID is ID, and then it would grab the ID of the video game. So this is a important fix, so you won't change all the entries of your database table. So please don't forget to always add the where clause here. And in the controller, since I'm lazy, let me just copy this now. And this is now a put method like that. We call this now update, and the same thing here, update async. Now regarding the put, there are different ways to do that, right? You could add the ID as a route first here, and also add it here, and then check if the actual video game exists. But let's try this first that way here. And here now in the put, again we try this out. As you can see, we now need the ID. So now let's say this is again ID 11, and we change that to string 1. We hit execute. We get nothing back, just OK 200. And now let's get all the games. And we saw that this actually worked. We changed it. But what happens now if we add ID 12, for instance, and hit execute? We also get an OK back, right? Everything went fine, but we don't have an ID 12 actually, right? So what is going on here? We don't know, and it seems like something worked out, although it isn't really true. So maybe we can change that real quick in the controller. And actually, what we maybe should also do, because you see that quite often in the post methods, is it doesn't really return OK, it returns a created at action. So here first, let's just correct this, all right? So you really see code that you might want to use also in product, or similar code, let's say. So so first we check if this game exists with await video game repository get by ID async, and here now we add the ID, so ID like that, and we also add the ID here and ID, all right, and put the ID here. Okay, now if the game is null, then we return a not found, all right, video game not found, Jesus, found, like that. And otherwise we update the video game. We can, to make be absolutely sure, set the video game ID to ID, and then here instead of OK, you usually maybe want to return a no content like that. And here actually we can do that as well, of course. You would return a created at action with name of get by ID async, and then here new ID is the video game ID. So these are the route values, and the actual value is the video game. as you can see here, it creates a created at action result object that produces a status code 201 created response. So yeah, maybe this is the better practice. All right, so now let's try this one more time. Restart application. We try to create another one. We can remove the ID actually again. Hit execute. Getting an error. No route matches the supplied values. This is interesting. Let me check that. Could be the case that... Where is it? Here. We have to remove this. Does not exist. Wait a sec. Maybe we can change the name here. Name is get by ID. And now we also, let's just say... Here we set this to get by ID. Restart application. Try this one more time. Execute. Well, it's different. Execute again. Okay. Now let's check this out. Try it out. Hit execute. We get 12, 13, 14. All right. So what was the problem here? And actually that the... I think, let me just double check the suffix. I think this is removed automatically. I'm not sure. Hit post, try this out, remove the ID, hit execute. Yeah, I think this is still the case. Yeah, so if you have a method with an async suffix and you want to use the created at action response, then in this case you would have to remove the async. And then this works. All right, so this is not the correct one, I guess. Get by ID. Let me try this one last time. So we hit post, try this out. Oh, this is string 2, 2, 2. So we see the difference. Remove the ID here. We hit execute and we get a 201 back. And this is the response body. Although the ID is always 0. Actually, this makes total sense because we do not know the ID of this new video game. So we have to change the repository. I hope you don't mind that this is kind of live because I didn't prepare it this way. I just saw it that I returned an OK 200. But what we can do here instead would be, instead of the execute async, you could actually do it that way. We just say, this is now our query. Query is insert and so on. And then actually this we're not done here. Now there's this select cast. I have to look this up. Select cast scope identity as int. Now then run this with the video game. So now we would have the new ID, which is actually an integer. So new ID is await connection. Now we got query single async. We want the integer back like that. And we add our query, but also the video game. All right. And now the video game ID is the new ID. Recap, add async. We didn't change the signature or anything. We don't return anything actually. We still use the video game object and this should work. So insert, we have the connection, we add a query now, so just the complete string with the parameter values, and after that select cast scope identity as int, and then we call this or run this and we should get the new ID then. All right, and then we just set the ID with the new ID, because here now the video game video game ID is 0. So let's just run or restart the application. There we are. We hit post. Try this out. And now let's just call this string 3. Remove the ID. Hit execute. And now we got the ID 18. All right, perfect. So this is correct now. And now here we can actually run this. And you see we get the result back from this single video game, in this case with strings 3 and so on, right? So this is the whole magic, let's say, or why the whole reason behind using a created at action. Jesus, this took a long time. I hope, again, sorry about that. I hope you don't mind. And Maybe you're still watching, but I assume you quit the video or stopped the video. But you guys told me that sometimes it's great to see these errors and how to fix them. So maybe you learned something new. Anyways, add async. Now this works as I want it to work. And in the controller, now we can use the created at action. But regarding the update now, let's try that as well. So put, and here we now use the 18, and then we don't use the, or need the ID here actually. And let's change that to 444, hit execute. We get 204, all right, nothing there. But again, when I now reload this, we see this is changed. Great. Okay, updating works. And now deleting. So in the repository, pretty much the same thing. We have the connection. And now we use again actually the execute function, execute async. So await connection, execute async, delete from video games where ID equals ID. New ID is ID, like that, and we return nothing actually. And regarding the controller, very similar to this thing here. So HTTP delete with the ID again. All right, public async task, action results. Again, I missed the B. Delete async and ID. And again, we check that, but otherwise we call delete async with the given ID. All right, restart application. There we are. And now let's hit 18. It executes. 204, success. When I try that, video game does not exist in the database. And here again, video game not found. Awesome. All right, so now we've got all the CRUD operations. All right, now this took way longer than expected, so I think it makes sense to make a two-part series out of this tutorial. Sorry about that if you were watching until now and you expected to get all the relationships, but maybe you're watching a little bit later, then you will definitely have the chance to watch this next video now. Just click on the video here on the screen, or you can also, of course, hit the subscribe button, like this video, and click the bell icon to be notified when this new video is online. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope I see you in the next video. Take care.